And it's sort of a fashion now to tell a story before starting some kind of webinar. And I just wanted to say that I was never the kind of person to just stay up all night long and put in brute force. That my technique was to review my notes during the day before an exam. So especially you students out there, maybe you can relate. And at this time, this was before like desktop computers. There was like a computer lab. This was like 1989. And these are terminals. These are not even independent computers. And I would take up my notes and write them very carefully. And then I would go to the photocopy place and I would shrink down 16 pages worth of stuff onto one page, front and back, to the minimum that I could read it, like size 6. And that was my cheat sheet. And that was like the whole engineering class is like on that one sheet of paper. And I was never like an A+ engineering student. I was definitely like an A- engineering student. But that was my technique. I'd rather have the efficiency and get a good night's sleep than just be like insane and study through it and all of that. Like, this is just not me.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I don't want balls. I go balls to like organic chemistry, biochemistry. I'm like, okay, 2 days before the exam, we're gonna because I always say there's a minimum of hours you need to study to pass a test. And I think the bare minimum is like 32 hours. So per test or whatever test. So I would just lock in and put in 32 hours, go take the test, get a or like A- or something, and forget all the information as soon as I walked out of the test. As soon as I walk out, it's gone.
Like, something so funny that you mentioned that. So one day I arrived at an exam and I could not for the life of me find my cheat sheet. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm screwed. Like, this is a 50-minute midterm. This is like 40% of our grade in this class. And I search, and fortunately I arrived like a few minutes early, but not much. And I didn't live that far away. So I asked the teacher, like, can I just run to find my exam before I looked at it? Because it was still like, face down on the table. And I'm like, you see, I haven't lifted it up yet. So I ran to my room, searched for it, couldn't find it. By the way, I never found it. Went back to the exam, finally took it. And it turns out I remembered everything anyway. It was just like the damn process of writing that cheat sheet.
Yeah.
And I think that was just like that taught me something. It's not like that would always be true. I'm still going to have the cheat sheet when I can, but there is a value to like organizing everything and getting it down in a certain way that just like imprints it on the mind.
I think I would have shit myself because like I think because my brain would have been thinking of like how could I do this and all this that I wouldn't have been able to recall any of the information. Like it would have been like nothing. It would just be like, how could you do this? You know this? Like how'd you lose this? You're like yeah, I'm just like all this in my head now. I'm just like I can't think. I'm in a.
Oh, I was so mad at myself, but once I sat down the second time, I'm just like, I just have to accept this, and I will do my best, and it's not the end of the world. And so it's a little bit what you were talking about, like driving for 6 hours. I just made the decision emotionally, like I just need to like go into this. And what is the younger generation call it? Embrace the suck. So that's that was that moment. Yes.
Yeah, I could tell the difference. Like INTJs generally have this like I noticed they usually have the NI, which is kind of like very. I have an analogy that I use. Two people robbing a bank, right? There's two people that rob the bank. Okay. The NI user that's like me will try to rob the bank. I call it willpower, and they'll just rob the bank. They'll come back, but then they like set off every alarm. They got the money, but then like they may have broke an arm, lost the arm or something. And then you have like the INTJ NI, which is kind of like they'll rob the bank and no one would know, no alarms go off, but they take a lot more time.
Yeah, and then we could do what the ISTP does, which is you join the bank and then internally over several years you just siphon off a lot of money, and
You said the
or and then you just become a banker and then you're just making money off of other people's money, and why steal it all? You can steal legally.
I mean, that happens a lot. That has happened a lot, especially with the
Just
crypto.
saying, not to impugn the ISTPs. I'm just saying, like, that's an example of a genius move that requires a bit of even more patience than INTJs have.
Yeah, because So Dario, I seen in the book you had people who hang around each other. Okay.
Yeah,
So
sorry.
you said in the book, people that hang around each other tend to have the same uh brain pattern.
It's weird. I've just noticed this as a phenomenon over time that as people would come in, sometimes a group of people from an organization or generally from a particular profession, like going to a conference, and it happens that a lot of people at that conference are like from this background, um, that they're going to have similar brain wiring. So if I talk to a bunch of musicians, and I did actually have like a music producer in LA come in West Hollywood, and there's a bunch of music production places just literally down the block from where I used to live. And they were very much, I was sort of expecting creative pattern, and that was there, but actually there was a lot of harmonizing. And this was a guy who actually produced rap music,
Mhm.
like rap and R&B. And I'm like, no, it makes sense, like ESFP preferences. And he's just like, he needs to do a lot of diplomatic one-on-one, like managing and coaching and all that kind of stuff. It isn't necessarily about just him and his creative process. It had to do a lot with interacting and like bringing to fruition the potential of other people. So I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And then I've seen sometimes, like in Sweden, there were these three gentlemen who came. They were all in their late 40s. They had worked together for 15 to 16 years. They all were within one letter type wise, ENFJ, ENFP, and then people ESFJ. They were designed by the organization. They were taught in a way that they would be interchangeable. So on any given day, they could go to like a location in the company or give this workshop or that workshop and present it the same way. And their brain wiring was like 95% the same. And that was just really scary because of course the three of them did live different lives,
Mhm.
but they've been working together every day for I don't know, 15, 16 years and were meant to be interchangeable. And then this is what happened.
Yeah.
And they weren't actually surprised by, and there were some individual differences that made sense for them. The one who had several, like three skiing concussions, really that like showed up in the brain, as a little bit different. But there very much is this feeling that, yeah, your what is it, dad or grandfather or whatever, who would say like, Sonny, be careful who you hang out with, your friends, or who you are. That's true. We do become more like the people that we're around.
Yeah, I've noticed that with me and my buddy Christian. We've been friends for over like 15 years. And like we don't even have to communicate. Like we could be somewhere and we don't even have to talk. We know like what each other's thinking. He knows what I'm gonna get mad about. I know what he's gonna get mad about. Like, and it's kind of weird because it's a SE child, SE parent, NI parent, NI child. So we kind of
Mhm.
like help each other. But it's like I was like when I read that, we both probably most likely have dominant preference. So I was like, that sounds kind of interesting. And we can like end each other's sentences sometimes. Like he knows what I'm thinking, and then I know what he's thinking. And sometimes people say y'all agree on way too much stuff. It's kind of funny. Um, but
Maybe you agree, but for different reasons. That's always possible
yeah,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thomas, you got a question, don't you?
Yeah, sure. What's up, Dario? I just wondering if you could just kind of like take us back to the beginning in terms of like I know that you say that you borrowed the nomenclature from Victor Golenko as far as the subtypes go, and my understanding is that you kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but you have over 600 brain scans, and it seems like you were able to categorize the brain scans, categorize the subtypes based on the similarity between the brain scans. But I guess I'm just kind of curious, like if you could just go back to the beginning and explain how you were able to, put people in these. I know I'm just probably not the best way to word it, but how do you put the people in these four boxes basically? Um,
Sure. Yeah. So for folks just tuning into the whole subtypes thing, um, what is it about? So way back when, like 2010, 11, in that original sort of book that Google made famous,
Yes, sir.
I got to like Google just for that. Yes, exactly.
What's
But
up?
that was like 65 university students who were mainly from the same small set of majors. And I don't think, and like ethnically, they were diverse and gender wise, but that was about it. And so they're young people and they're representing a certain kind of person. So fast forward 15 years later, and yeah, there's over 600 people now. We now have actually affiliate practitioners in the US. It started this November. So sometimes people ask me like, oh, can I get it? Can, you know, here or that city, that? I'm like, I'm not going to be there, but I know someone nearby. So I think that even the pace will accelerate in the more diversity of backgrounds. The thing that helped a lot was that over time, I always kept the cover sheet, which was more than just their name and like, I understand what I'm getting into, you know, the release form. That there's demographic information. It's like, what country were you educated in primarily, not just your citizenship. You know, what was your academic major, but also what are you doing now? So gathering that kind of information and then being able to do quite a number in the UK, in Denmark, Norway, tiny bit in Australia, also getting like 60 some odd reports from India, from Mumbai. And these were mostly graduate students or young workers in Mumbai. And getting these demographics and being able then to just visually see, okay, there's like a wide, if you imagine like a color palette, there's definitely more than 4 colors there, but you know, there's like, I would say 24 colors very easily, sort of to use a metaphor for the way that people's brains can be organized, or the themes that we see in organization. But there are still 4 primary colors. And I think statistically, it's very safe to go to 4. I could go to more. Helen Fisher occasionally does talk about not just 4, but 8. Like each one has a sub, you know, sort of subgrouping there. But it's what I felt confident with. And I knew that because of the context when people do brain imaging, even though I'm trying to stimulate them in a lot of different ways, I'm still only capturing them on a particular day, in a particular situation. And the brain wiring is something that takes time to develop. So it's not just like only that day. It's not. But it still is something that maybe is not getting the full person. So I think 4 is also safe. You know, like I have some people who've retested, and while their brain imaging, like the wiring will shift from the first to the second one, the subtype remains the same. And so I'm like, okay, that's like a pretty safe category. Now, how I got started also was in terms of organizing them is I had a student, I mean, I had a lot of interns for a while from UCLA, God bless them, all like really smart, motivated, genius setup that the university has. They pay the university to work for me for free. You know, yeah, that's the scam called our education system. But no, I think they did get, they got something very special. And I know that 2 of them did actually get jobs afterwards because of doing the lab with me. So I'm like, no, that's cool. And one of them said, I'd really like to take a data set, because they always had a chance beside their training to do just like their own project on couples or on music or whatever it is. And one of them, she said, I just want to take all the ENFP data, because that's actually the biggest number of people, ENFPs, or we should say people who score ENFP and sort of best fit is ENFP, and just divide those into 2 categories, into 4 categories, divide them in different ways. The easiest is like male, female. And we definitely immediately saw a visible difference there. That what was in the foreground for one type was in the background, or one group. So what was in the foreground for male ENFPs was in the background for female ENFPs, and vice versa. Like, sort of, if you took ENFP as a general thing and like just sort of sorted it into 2, you'd see like, oh yeah, like one is like, it's just a foreground background difference between the 2. But as we looked at more people and of all types, I noticed that male female thing was not as important as career, because we have demographic information for all of the people. And that what really seemed to make the difference was career. And not just like the career that's written on a piece of paper, but like, how are you doing your career? Like, do you work in a big company? Like, are you an independent consultant? Do you work a lot one-on-one with people? Are you like a small group kind of person? And this wasn't always clear from the demographics, but a lot of times, I mean, I give them several, you know, a couple of lines, they can fill in stuff. And so there was that. And then there was Helen Fisher's stuff on hormones and neurotransmitters. And I didn't think a lot of it at the time, but I was invited to a talk that Victor Golenko gave, and I was asked if I would bring in some of my brain imaging data. Is like a little, addition to Victor's talk. And the talk was going to center around enfj as the example. And I said, okay, I'll bring in my enfj data. So I quickly go through and I sort the enfj data and I present what I see. And Victor is talking about the subtypes for this talk. Mm-hmm. And it's just very clear that these are like everybody there was like, oh yeah, these match very closely. So at this point, I was like really motivated to push through all of them. Victor's book, I don't know if I have it on the shelf somewhere here. Surely I do. And, it's all in English, which, because he wanted to make it as accessible. And it's a socionics book as opposed to like a Western Myers-Briggs inspired book. And I would say that there's a few deviations, but those deviations from his examples, which are written from experience as a clinician and from theory, are I think simply reflecting like slight developmental differences. Like harmonizing folks can be lazy. This is a thing. Mm-hmm. It's not like the mature harmonizing, whereas the people I got tend to be professionals who are active and they had money to pay for the session and all of that, which is not that expensive, but still. So I think I got slightly different. I maybe didn't get the cross section of society that he would get. And actually he would get more people who were interested in type or have like a, psychological reason to come in. It was like patients to a therapist.
Okay.
And so there are those slight differences. But besides that, I'm like, these are so close. It's like, Victor, can I just use your terms? And I showed him some examples of what I did, and he said yes. And long story short, that's what came to it. And there's more. Like you could take the functions and break them down into two groups too, like each function, like what you guys were talking about before we pressed record, for introverted feeling. Oh, and I should mention this fourth piece, which came in right towards the end, was a type researcher in China who is actually at UCLA as like a post-grad student. I mean, he'd gone to school in the US and very like fluent English, and his story about it and how he saw like Chinese culture was different from American culture and how he had come up with subtypes on his own, just seeing like, oh, there has to be, because a Chinese intj is different than an American intj. And that, when you put all of that together and then just immerse myself in it and just go through all of the data and all of the like, it's not even number crunching. It's about taking network diagrams and using like network analysis tools. And that's like the sort of longish story. Sorry about that, but I do think it is a story to give everybody credit.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. You also talked about Nesbitt in the book. You said he had some similar classifications as well.
Yeah, so this is what the Chinese student Zhihan. He's not a student now. He's a postdoc, Ph.D. That this is the research that he originally relied upon, and then he stumbled across me. And so Nesbitt talks about this, like when showing people visual images and you ask people what's going on in the image, people in China and people in America give different answers. And Americans focus on the lead, like the main object that's in the foreground. Like, oh, it's a soldier in battle, and then they'll describe the soldier. Mm-hmm. And Chinese people will look at an image and they actually spend a lot of time talking about the relationship that they see between the object or whatever is in the foreground and the background. And that's telling us, so they're not going to dwell on that one central object. It's sort of like in bands, and everybody is like, oh, Coldplay, Chris Martin. But, there's other people in the band who make it happen. Smashing Pumpkins, yes, there's like one person that we all know of, but there's a band that's there. And so the Chinese people are more focused on the band, and Americans are more focused on who is the star.
Like the quarterback.
Like the quarterback, absolutely. Right, the whole team is the quarterback, right? No, it's not the,
Or the
just the
president, like
quarterback.
the president.
Yeah, or just the government is the president. I mean, and there is, America is organized, and actually, frankly, China also today is somewhat organized. Like the person at the top does have a lot of control, but the same, I think sometimes we give credit, even when companies do very well. Oh, it's the leadership. Actually, extensive research has been done, not by me, but by other people, looking at things like who sends and receives the most email in organizations. It turns out that the key nodes in not just that question, but that's like a kind of question they ask. The key people are actually high specialists in the organization. And that's everybody thinks of Apple and they think of like Steve Jobs. And if they really know history, they'll think of Steve Wozniak. But the whole Apple interface is not Steve Jobs. I mean, there's this other, and his name slips my mind at the moment, but this other really cool dude who's probably an ISFP, who's the one who actually has been like managing the interface stuff for like 20 or 30 years. And is like the designer of the look and the feel and all of that to make sure that continues and where that is. It turns out those people are actually the critical people in organizations, and that you could swap out, unless the CEO is terrible. It's really those critical people that matter. And then when organizations lose a critical person, it's that kind of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, the background people, they make everything go.
That's right. That's right. Even in the Roman galley, if you removed all the rowers, like that general is not going to go anywhere on his boat.
I mean, you need. It's funny how it all kind of plays out. It's like you need like maybe that one ENTJ, then you have about 2 to 3 or 4 INTJs behind that ENTJ, and then it like branches off, and then he's got his reliable INTPs that he could go to. It's you can see the system play out like no matter where you go, it's the same thing. But Dario, I got to get into something interesting. Couples. Everybody cares about couples. Have you did any brain wiring on couples and see any compatibility with brain wiring and type?
Subtypes.
Yeah. So so several years ago, for that quarter, all of the interns decided they wanted to do something on couples. So I'm like, okay, your job is to go and I did some too for like people more my age, but like, let's just recruit as many couples as possible. And even and because they were interns, I'm just like, all these people go free as long as you can bring them in and you're doing the work of the actual like brain imaging session. And it's so funny because there were such different situations, and to just broadly say, oh yeah, couples who've been together the longest, like their brain imaging is going to be more similar. I think there's truth to that, but it doesn't mean that they're happy couples. And so there is an element of it. Like I remember this couple came in and I knew they were like in their early 30s, and they had been together for maybe 5 or 6 years. They fought quite a bit. I happen to know this. They were the dude was definitely ESFP. His wife, who was Russian, I couldn't quite tell if ISFJ or ISTJ, and she didn't do the assessment, so I was never really sure. And they just, they fought quite a bit. But of course, always with couples, I separate them. So for the first 40 minutes or whatever the brain imaging session, they're like in a room and their partner is like outside, in the garden sitting, or they haven't arrived yet, whatever it is. And then in the last 10 minutes, I bring them together to do a joint problem solving activity. And it's so interesting how people's brain wiring changes when their partner comes into the room, to the point where I have a very strict policy that's like, yeah, your partner can't be here when we do this session. Unless you really want to know, like that's your question that you're asking as like an addition at the end. How do we get along? The other thing is that the similarity may be superficial. So many times when I do presentation, I just show one map, like one brain wiring map, and say for like this person or that person, but actually there isn't one map. I mean, people who do brain imaging know you can create as many slices of maps, sort of like slicing up a loaf of bread, or like tuning to different channels in the radio. Like you can draw different maps. And so you can have a different map for delta waves and a different one for beta waves. And it's so interesting that when you just composite them all together, that the couple, I remember that couple that fought a lot. Yeah, there was a lot of anxiety and stuff when they're trying to problem solve together. But on the surface, in that composite view, they looked really similar. But when I actually sliced it up into those individual pieces, wow, they were actually, for the most part, quite different. You know, it was just in this beta range, which is very much like an active daily problem solving range, that they were the same. And then everywhere else, they were actually very different. And I'm like, no wonder they have a lot of conflict. Like they've learned how to synchronize, but not in really a happy way, because that synchronization is only in one place. But besides that, yeah, I would say I even had people who came in who were like childhood friends and that kind of thing. And even if they were very different types, and even somewhat different professions, they still had brain wiring that was surprisingly similar. And then if they were very different, gosh, I remember when ESTP and his brand new 3 weeks ESFJ girlfriend came, she was mortified that he would even see her wearing this disgusting brain imaging cap, which ruined her hair and her makeup and so on. No, I mean, really, this was like her concern. She's like, no, he can't be here just because I don't want him to see me like this, and no pictures. I'm like, yeah, I don't think this is going to last. Because the brain wiring was just so different. And it's not that people can't overcome that, because of course, like hormones can overcome, the brain wiring. I think we all know this from experience. But then is that enough time and motivation to allow the two people to come together more closely to find ways to synchronize? Or is it just like a bridge too far? Mm-hmm. So I think we can say a general principle, but in practice, it's like every story is sort of interesting.
Because in the book you say, like, generally speaking, the dominant will be with the harmonizing. It's like, it's kind of like you said, like dominant can either be with the harmonizing, like they'll either like the harmonizing or they hate them. And then you said for the normalizing, you're like, they'll either like the creative or they hate them. So
yeah, it's like can the creative person, I mean, this is my experience, creative person going to work in an organization for 2 years sort of intensely. And there were definitely some normalizing people that were quite challenging to get along with. I mean, they were like lovely as individual people, but in terms of like their work process and how they thought about things, they were different type and different brain wiring. I remember even going back way when I had another INTJ, German, as an office mate at UCLA. And that dude was so OCD. And I'm so not OCD. This was like, I didn't like, this was even before the brain imaging, but I just know if we did it, like, yeah, he would be normalizing or dominant, one of those two, just like very German. And so there can be, even when people are the same type, sometimes we meet somebody and like, we're supposed to get along, right? But we're so different. And I think that's an example where it can be very different. I really feel like it's more, to be honest, Antonia Dodge that has found that that's a helpful rubric in coaching, to like the dominant harmonizing and how they can connect. It probably more easily in general than, especially if their values and goals are sort of the same. The goals, like if the dominance goals and the harmonizing values happen to get together and mesh, then they can do very well. Whereas creative, I think, is really a challenge long-term in organizations. And a sort of creative normalizing couple is probably quite a, I'm just saying this from like general observation, not statistics, but it would be a challenge. I think to go from somebody who has like a lot of freedom to all of a sudden be like, yeah, you need to work in this cubicle over there that we've assigned you on these hours, in this way. And I'm like, yeah, that's not how my creative process works. And we've set up like a tracking system, and because there's like lots of like electronic tools today to like, track people's projects and tasks, and you like put things in and you check them off and this and that. I'm like, I don't work that way.
I think it's too much SI for me. Too much SI. Like I cannot stand like too much, like a lot of data, like a lot of like small things. small little like concrete details, I'm like, yo, just no, just leave me alone with that. Like you don't put me to sleep. Like it just doesn't work for me. Just let me
Yeah,
work, leave me alone, and I'll be fine.
yeah. And on the other hand, I was thankful that somebody was tracking it, because God forbid if we hadn't had anybody tracking it, that would have been a disaster. I'm just like, there are two things I sort of let her know. One is, when you see me finish something and I hand it in, could you check it off, please, in your system? Like, I'm not going to log in unless it's during a meeting and you make us all log in. And then the other is like, I'm not necessarily going to do things in sequence, and I might even change my mind about something, and I'll do my best to let you know. But I remember the first time I changed my mind, she looked just mortified. He's like, oh, I thought we agreed on such and such. And I'm like, yeah, but reality didn't fit with what I thought would happen. Like, this is what we needed to do after all. So that's, I think this is a great way. Like, the subtypes can even be presented as a model all on their own, separate from type. And people will still find a lot of use and benefit. And it almost sidesteps some of the more, like, I don't know, sort of deep assumptions that type has, like, oh, you're opposites types, therefore you're not going to get along. And it's also more concrete. So it really is like, oh, you showed this kind of brain wiring. This is the kind of like daily like workflow process and environment you probably want to be in. And unfortunately, sometimes people can show brain wiring because the brain wiring is not ideal. It's about what you've been doing for the last couple of years up until today. And if the person is unhappy in their situation, maybe that means that, yeah, they want to change their brain wiring to some other subtype. And I did have a guy who came in who had been doing sales, ESTP, and in an organization, successful, and didn't like, was just bored, frankly, felt unchallenged. And when we sliced it up, like I described that slice of bread, when we sliced it up, I saw actually your challenge zone is in the creative area, and yet your like overall picture and your everyday work process now is normalizing. So you probably, if you really want to feel challenged, you need to do A, B, C, X, Y, Z that all fit under like the creative life process and environment.
Thomas, you did have another one, didn't you? Another question?
I mean, yeah, I have a bunch of questions, but well, just a quick comment, like on like the whole brain scan thing. I don't know if it's really within like your interests. But I mean, obviously, I know we've talked about Enneagram before, and I think it'd be, you have over 600 brain scans. It would be interesting if you could somehow find, at least look into if there's any connection between Enneagram and brain wiring. You'd be the first person to do something like that if there was some kind of connection.
Yeah, I sort of got to ding myself for not. I mean, I know my rationale for not including Enneagram earlier. A lot of it was simply getting people. MBTI, especially rewinding 10 to 15 years, was more well known than Enneagram.
Okay.
And especially in terms of having an assessment process, that's like a validated assessment. It's only in the past few years that there's been like validated Enneagram assessments.
Mm-hmm.
For people who don't know type, for example, I learned I need to give them the type assessment before they come in for the EEG. Otherwise, they will probably never do it because it's not their interest. And I have to like hold the results hostage to get them to do it. Like that's like the most extreme. So to give them yet another assessment. That said, now that they're practitioner affiliates and they have asked for a slot in the demographics to put in Enneagram, but and there's lots of, there's like Enneagram, but there's also the wing, and then the sort of subtype and tri-type, and and I'm like, I don't even know how we can fairly assess that, but just to say it's like that you can indicate two, like primary and secondary. So for me, that would probably be 5. And then I'm like, well, I could put 4, but I could also put 7. And one of them makes sense in their theory, and the other one is maybe. I would really like to go do that more. So it's in the to-do list for the person who now manages the online site, where people can just, anybody anywhere in the world can upload their very standardized EEG data file. and generate a report, just like a push of a button. I mean, you got to enter some extra information, like what did they do when in the course of their half hour or whatever. But it's high on the list now, and I'm confident now that they're practitioners that there will be gathering that kind of information when they can.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Yeah, you got other ones, don't you?
Yeah. Well, on let me see. Well, one thing I could ask is that maybe about if you could just clarify something about NI. Like on the Oracle NI, you talk about cultivating an aesthetic or spiritual practice. So what is that exactly?
So when I first got to thinking about that, it was like reading chapter 10 of Psychological Types again, and Jung really, although he mentioned some elements of the way we talk about NI today in terms of visioning for the future, most of his discussion is actually around the sort of yin holistic version of NI, which I believe was probably his version of like his favorite or preferred version of NI, which he linked to a spirituality, yes, and also aesthetics.
Okay.
And I, in my mind, had always linked aesthetics with FI, because it's the INFPs and ISFPs of the world who are the musicians and painters, and not that they're the only types, but I think we all know that there's like this draw for them and this talent that they have for artistic composition. But Jung was like, and he didn't necessarily mean art when he said aesthetics. He meant that there was, like, he used poetry as an example and about engaging the world in an aesthetic way. That everything, like when you read poetry, every line of poetry has some kind of symbolic value. And there's like maybe references to other pieces of literature or things in the person's life. And there's like this dimensionality to it. And it's supposed to impact you. You know, you're supposed to open yourself up and allow you to be impacted by the poetry. And I think that's what he meant by aesthetics. And where I experienced it in my life, and when I talk to INTJs who are more likely to be female also in my experience, but also maybe in social science or humanities or religion, spirituality, that they experience this different version of NI. That's not always about envisioning the future or planning ahead. It's not this sort of like, I don't want to say it's willpower, but there definitely is an element of the will that's in this sort of like Yangish analytical version of NI, which I can completely relate to, like setting goals in life, like working towards those, like, see, yes, I could be here in this amount of time. I always underestimate the time, but never mind. But this version, I really found like this yin version really honors the history of NI in a sort of human species perspective. Like, who are the shamans? And I feel like when I go to Costa Rica or to Sweden or whatever, and I sit for some kind of shamanic thing, I'm not saying all the time, but definitely it's like an INFJ activity. And I really feel like, even though there are other types there, and I know people who lead these events are also INTJ and INFP, but what they have in common is this sort of yin holistic version of NI, which is about the world of archetypes and allowing yourself to be like a channel or a vessel for the archetypes and working with people's energy or their own energy. And it seemed that this is whether the person was, whether they were like INFJ, INTJ, even ENTJ, INFP, that when they were using introverted intuiting, it was this Jungian version of NI. That's how I want to sum it up. It's a Jungian version of NI. And Jung, creating his red book, like had illustrations of his dreams and his visions and all of that. I mean, sometimes he'd call them dreams, but actually they were just like active imagination induced visions, in an altered state. That's a lot of what it is. It's not the Elon Musk version of NI, that everything we do in our company is oriented towards working on Mars and we're going to get there. And I mean, that's the thing he said. Yeah. Yeah, I don't understand people who say like, oh, he's clearly like an introverted sensing type. I'm like, what? No. I don't know what version of type you're working with, but it's not the version that Jung worked with, or any
What type?
sense.
So, what type do you think he is?
Elon Musk. I'm very hesitant, having met some actors in real life, to actually give his type. I mean, I think the default easy answer is intj. I think if he isn't intj, he's quite close to that. He does. I know he said some things at times like, oh, needing to be around other people. I think that has a support element rather than like, oh, I get bored. So, I mean, he could be ENTJ. It's just like the NI visioning part is very clear. And his capacity to manage complexity is just like the complexity of multiple businesses and multiple visions. I just don't see like an ISTJ or ISTP like being it quite that same way. And I love he has this rebellious streak to him, which is very much like in the opposite type. Like he will just speak his mind at times in a very sort of like, I don't give a damn what you think. And so there is that as well. I mean, it's the elements that pick it up. I'm just saying, like somebody said like, oh so and so actor who's said like ESTP or something, and I'm like, oh, I've actually met him in person. It is like really obviously an ISFP. I mean, still my opinion, but I think meeting somebody in person is a little bit different. I have been to SpaceX, but unfortunately, and I gave a workshop there, but unfortunately, I did not meet him. Yeah, he was not in the building that evening. Yes.
I think he's always working. I mean,
yeah. Either that or arranging to have more children.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I guess when you have enough money, you can do what the hell you want.
Yeah. It's I have to say that the operations there would bring pride to any NTJ. Like the way that SpaceX works and like the basic principles of like how the business is organized and their philosophy, and I'm just like, oh yeah, this is like NTJ paradise.
All on one accord. Shelly, you had some? You want to talk about the game?
Oh yeah, I was just curious how what the outcome of that game that you were working on was. Was it successful or released or?
Oh, you mean like the
you were
online
working on personality types?
Yeah. So for people who don't know, I spent a couple of years, I mean, on and off for 5 years, I've been in Norway with this company called Sayfr, Sayfr. And what they do is they build training simulations using the Unity engine, which is the same thing that you'd use for a lot of video games, to create a video game-like experience where you go through and you have to solve technical and interpersonal problems. And there's whole ongoing storylines. And the way I like to say it is every module is sort of like a 25-minute TV episode. And every minute you're making a decision. And there's a couple of ways that they can end. And every character that you encounter has a personality type. Every module has an Enneagram theme. So like the very first one, people always start off with this trust, and which Enneagram 6. And of course, then that means that there are issues of paranoia and loyalty in the module, and it's just really fun to have worked on these. And yeah, we finished. Well, I guess I did 9 of them total, but 8 of them are in the main sequence that companies get, and it was tremendously rewarding. I mean, to design the characters, to write the different scenes, and sort of it isn't really choose your own adventure. It has an element of that, but a lot of the choices you make are tactical choices along a like 80% linear story arc. And there are some like side quests you can do, and it can branch out in 2 different directions towards the end based on everything else you've done. Yeah, the characters are animated. They have body language, like this and whatever. By the time I left, that I had finished my job for them, and they had run out of money for writing modules. So now it's their job to sell them. But now that you ask, Mengju Wu, who runs or heads up Type School, which is an online space for people to take both digital go at your own pace and regularly occurring courses online that are all type related, that these will be part of a leadership, like type Enneagram and leadership course. And so I think then anybody who's interested in type and or the Enneagram and really wants to be immersed in situations where their skills are tested. And the nice thing, I feel, the philosophy behind it is that we want people to play 2 or 3 times, because the best 2 teachers are making decisions and then experiencing consequences, especially failure. People learn from failure. And it's not like the usual HR training where you get slides and then you take a test and you're supposed to give the right answers. Like, it's not like that at all. I mean, we give people some hints along the way if they need it. But, you know, even if you pass a module the very first time, you avert the fire or the flooding or whatever is going to happen, and the NPCs are happy at the end, that we encourage people to play again, to experience what it's like to mouth off to your boss, to ignore your coworkers, and see, like, experience what happens. I do believe it's really, in going through these, it's about like really finding your hat that you can wear, that's like your human relations hat in organizations or on teams. And so, yeah, that's done, and it is available, and there are companies using it now, and they're mostly business to business, but I really want to bring it to the type community. And if perchance Personality Hacker also says yes to it, I don't know, we have a meeting in a week. It might be available through them too, but I don't want to speak for Joel and Antonia.
Okay, it's really cool. So another question, I guess, more related to your book. Do you think over the course of your life that you've changed subtypes?
I think at times, yes, I went on like little excursions into another subtype. Like, if Dr. Fisher is right, and that there's this hormonal foundation to the subtypes, and she gives them different names, but like definitionally, if you look, or descriptively, if you look at them, they're very similar. Then we're going to be in the same subtype for a long, long time. I mean, people go through like midlife, and maybe their hormones change, or, you know, between childhood and teenage years, it could change. I certainly feel like I was, as like a child, encouraged to be creative. And then as I got to what was a very competitive high school, and expectations of parents at the time too, that I would become normalizing. And I might have even scored as normalizing for a while, had it been a thing. But I knew that was never for me. Like, I just like, oh yeah, I'm getting a degree in engineering, but I'm never going to work as an engineer in a big company like 60 hours a week. Like, this is just not going to happen. It's not me. I don't mean it can't happen. I mean, it could have. I could have gone to job fair and like gotten a job and all of that, and it would have killed me. And I'm just not. And it's funny because I know another INTJ in the same program as me in aerospace, and we took courses together, and he went on and became an engineer in aerospace and found it very rewarding. So I know that that's like a life option. It doesn't feel completely weird, but every time, like even teaching within a big organization, UCLA, I think over those like 17 years, 3 times another faculty member came in to observe me. Everything else was just like, oh, like the students seem to be doing well, and you're covering all the material you're supposed to, so you must be doing something right. And that was that like freedom to be able to do stuff, even weird stuff with the students, like take them outside and do these live group simulations, and this rebellious side to especially in teaching social science, I'm just like, the best way to get the ideas across, especially to overcome bad ideas that they're going to learn in some other classes, is to simply through experiential learning. Like, it's not going to be from my mouth, it's going to be experiential learning. And so I'm like, okay, we have to do live group simulations. And then I will trust that the simulation plus the concepts and their field work together will, the universe will, those experiences will provide them with the honest information that will override anything dumb that they're learning in other classes. Not that all other classes were like that, but students would often complain to me about some of their classes. So I don't know. I think I've always been tended to that, but over the years that I've done brain imaging on myself, sometimes I score as like this, I don't know how to say it exactly, somewhere between harmonizing and normalizing. Especially when by the time I finished in the company for 2 years. But I still felt like, yeah, that's actually not for me. And I turned down, permanent employment. I said, I don't want that. Like, I'm not, and I could foresee like what was going to happen for myself and for the company. And so I'm like, yeah, I'm going to get off the ship at this port here and I'll see you all later. And that turned out to be a wise choice. I mean, they're great. I loved them. And I would not want to be a permanent employee. Like, I'm just not normalizing.
So, Dario, are you the creative subtype?
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah.
I would figure. Tom, you got some more questions, don't you?
Yeah. Well, maybe I want to touch on the neurotic, well, the neurotic boundary thing. I know you talk about. I'm just gonna quote you. So it says, neuroses erupt when the ego and unconscious clash, particularly when we're under stress. So can you just explain, what do you mean when the ego and unconscious clash?
So it's like the ego has this it's like a conscious, organized understanding of our own psyche, not just our favored functions, but it can also include like non-preferred functions, like third or fourth function, that have at least been integrated into how we do things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like, okay, it's like, here's the container, like, this is me, okay, and this is like, I know what's inside here, and this is all the ego stuff. But the fact is that, Jung said the psyche is not just something up here, the psyche is all around you. So if a person is like, oh, I'm very spiritually mature, but I have a lot of money problems, and I don't really have a career, Jung is like, yeah, your life is very unbalanced. Like, you're not actually mature. Like, you've developed in one direction, but you're actually very one-sided. So when I say unconscious, or he means unconscious, he doesn't just mean like material welling up from the sort of the basement of the mind. It can also mean things coming in from the world that are like, oh, you can't pay your rent again. Like, there's information that comes in and clashes. And so it can be from the inside, but it can also be from the outside. And which Jung didn't really see as actually that big of a difference. And though when those really clash, then the person is going to be in a stressed out state. And I feel it's important to have a practice like breath work, for example. But it could also be, I mean, there are other techniques to know when you're actually stressed out. Because what can happen when people get stressed out is there's a certain point where they can say, yeah, I'm stressed out, but they may not realize how much tunnel vision they actually have around it, that the cap on the container is very shut, very tight. It's like, no, we're going to get through this. And all of this other stuff is like, no, that's not going to work. Like, no, you need to pay your bills. No, like, there's a reason why, you've been single for 28 years. Like, whatever. That's not me, by the way. Yeah, no. But just saying, that when there's this clash that happens where either life is giving feedback or emotionally, I mean, Jung named all these neuroses that people have. The claustrophobia is one example. It could be anger outbursts. It could be all of these things, which can be signs of stress. but they can also point to deeper imbalances in the person's, and in fact, stress is an imbalance in the person's life. So when they clash, how does that come out? So INTJs, it's the introverted feeling tends to get involved and like get very moralistic and like barks in this voice. That's like very much like, how dare you? And you know, I think every type has its sort of ways of managing it. And so there's this idea of a neurotic zone or neurotic boundary. And I think, especially for people in the like, say, 15 to 45 age range, most of the material that comes into that neurotic boundary is the third function. Not all of it, because it's its own thing. It's not synonymous with the third function, but it's probably like 70, 80% the third function. And then there's some also fourth function stuff, I think, that can be there. And if the person's really pressed, it can even be like second function stuff. And I think as people get older, it's more like they could be some fourth function things as well, like start to percolate up quite a bit. But it really is just like, how can we, what are the signs that we're in the space? So for like ENTPs, for example, they're so talented at experiencing drama in organizations, in the workplace. They don't intend for this to happen. In fact, they're really like, why does this always happen? Like, I'm here for 3 months or 2 years or whatever it is, and some person is getting vindictive, or this is happening or that is happening, like a lot of social interaction FE stuff. And that's part of their neurotic boundary. And I don't want to say it's like, oh, we can therefore have a completely peaceful life and no neurotic boundary, because if we had that, that's like a completely peaceful ocean, we also wouldn't grow. So when people ask, how can we like deal with our neurotic boundary, like, quote, get rid of it? And I'm like, you can learn how to work with it. You can overcome some of the issues in it, but then you're just going to encounter new ones. You know, it's like you try and drain the space, but just like new stuff is going to start to come in. But it's also how you grow. So unfortunately, like, there, just as there's a sweet spot for being challenged in life, like too little is bad, too much is bad, there's a sweet spot for being neurotic. And a little bit neurotic, it goes a long way for growth. And a lot neurotic actually has the exact opposite effect and is very sabotaging.
Gotcha. Well, I definitely think like your description of the FI neurotic boundary, that's really hits close to home. You know, that's on point for sure. So
if it's any consolation, all of us INTJs and ISTJs are in the same boat.
yeah, it's yeah. I don't know what you would call it, but like, even, well, if there's one thing worse than the neurotic boundary, though, it's just when things are going really bad to the point where the INTJ is getting like self-destructive. So I'm not sure if you'd have like a different name for that, or if that's also like included in like the neurotic boundary. But
I would say more that's like a little bit deeper situation, and I try not to get too clinical in the book, and that was a little bit more the magic diamond.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah, I think the self-destructive part is really the when the extroverted sensing becomes way overdone. And I'm reminded of, and I don't know him personally, but it was very much in the news academically, well-regarded professor at USC in Los Angeles. I think was like in the medical field or something like that. And just looking at his picture and like a little interview and stuff, I'm like, oh, he seems like an INTJ. Dude got involved with like party drugs and prostitutes, and obviously he was having a lot of fun for a while. And then it just like went way overboard. You know, there's like a little bit of party drug, and then there's crack. And yeah. And it just got like way out of control. And I think he lost his position and all of that. So that was and that to me was a lot of like extroverted sensing that was just in a bad direction.
Kind of reminds me of Tiger Woods.
True. Yeah.
When he got into the girls, he did, you know, he got a very smart guy, but I know inside myself that if I go too far, you can't come back. And like if you do something like Tiger, you can't come back, man. If you out here like sleeping with like 10 girls every week, you can't go back down to just one. It's like you're gonna need some serious like intervention, and you're probably gonna relapse several times. It's never gonna be the same. It's just like never even like I don't know, like my vision just knows like, hey, don't do this. Like don't partake in this. Like this is gonna lead here. You don't want this.
Yeah, there just as nothing succeeds quite like success is nothing kills quite like failure. Like is a spiral of going in a particular direction. And that's why I feel, especially as an NJ type, to watch for tunnel vision. And the antidote to that is input from friends that I trust, even when I don't like their input. Like the thing that I would fear the most in my life, weird as it is to sound, is to not have friends later who would give me honest feedback. I mean, I'd like their support too, but the honest feedback would be very important. And I've even said to a couple of my closest friends, I'm like, you have my permission now. If it gets to this point, like 20 years from now or whatever, where I just need like some mushrooms or ayahuasca or LSD or something, you have my permission now to sneak that in. Like, if you really think I need it, like, and I'm resistant, like, I'm already letting you know now, like, I trust that you will do the best thing for me.
I wouldn't go that far, but I fear losing my brain.
Oh, no. See, the beautiful thing about dominant introverted intuiting is like, NI is like, nobody can handle that shit. Yeah. I'm not saying that's really true, but there always is like, yeah, no, it doesn't matter what the psyche throws at me. Like it's if the alien actually landed, yeah, I'd be scared, but I would not like go crazy.
I don't know. That's the last thing on my list to ever lose is my brain. So I've heard some scary stories growing up and like in my ethnic of people like doing drugs and just like losing their mind. And I'm just like, no. I heard that story. I'm like, not for me. You're like, oh no. I don't know if somebody was talking about like my mom was saying like one of her friends took like angel dust or something like that.
Oh,
But never the same mentally ever again. So I'm like, pfft. I just cut all of that on the list. Like, nope, none of that. Boom. But
yeah.
Dario,
There was some stuff that came out in the 60s that was definitely like change you and your personality and your life forever, and not for the best.
yeah.
Yeah. And angel dust, I understand, is one of those. Yes.
One of those.
Yeah.
So Dario, what is in the future for you when it comes to are you releasing more books? What's next for you?
I have this tormenting page in my notebook of like all the projects to tackle or finish, which looking at that doesn't help me in any way, because then I just freak out that there's like the next 15 years. I think what I'm focused really on right now in the short term, like this 6 months, year, is really getting this affiliate practitioner EEG process like set up and really rolling, and everybody getting comfortable with it and the process working, so that a lot of people in the type community, if they're interested, can actually also do EEG. And yeah, it's an investment, but it's in concert with Personality Hacker as they go around, because they very much believe in live events. So as they go around to different places and being able to say, with every live event we're doing, even if you don't come to the live event as a participant, although if you do, we'll give you a discount, you can do brain imaging with one of our practitioners. And that will add to your understanding of who you are and your type. And because, the landscape is changing so much. I just attended like a 2-hour intro tutorial to Midjourney 6 this morning. And not even that I'm an artist, but it's just the awareness of what's coming with AI and what's already come. I think it's Joel who has said, what is it? How AI is now is the worst it will ever be. So if we think it's like pretty dope in some ways now, like it's very much going to be like, give it 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, it's really going to change how we interact. That I use a software called HeyGen. to create, like record like 3-minute video of myself, upload it. They create an avatar of me, and then they also sample my voice, and it gets the body language and all of that. Not a huge amount, but like, you know, from the chest upward. And then I can just type what I want me to say, and it delivers video that is me, and it's really quite convincing. Does it have the dynamic range of me? No. But it really, if this is what's coming, there's going to continue to be big changes in the workplace. So I think that's my motivation then is like, okay, let me do something like very tangible and physical that requires actual technicians physically doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's, I think, more of an openness to brain imaging, acceptance, and this going beyond the ways we've been doing things, like even pencil paper assessments, even on the internet, like, oh, MBTI online or whatever. Like, you know, you can just ask ChatGPT to take you through a 10-minute type profiling process. And it's, if you don't use the free version is mediocre at it, but the pro version now, and not to mention version 5, which will have like audio and video, and it'll be analyzing your body language and facial expressions. And I'm sure that the cognitive type people will be very stoked by that. It's like, well, why would I take a pencil paper assessment when I can just sit down with my AI and have a conversation that's open-ended for 10 minutes, and it will tell me more, and I'll be able to I don't have to choose between A and B. You know, oh, do you like go to parties or not? Like, hey, can I explain why and when? Yes, I do like going to parties sometimes. So I think a lot of changes are coming in, and my focus, one, is on keeping up with them enough to not feel like an idiot, like out of the loop, and also to continue to teach, I think at least once, and if not twice this year, the Future Tools for Type course through Personality Hacker, which is a live in person. People learn how to do brain imaging, and even if they don't want to do it as a profession, there's equipment there, and they get to learn how to do it and have the whole experience, as well as using ChatGPT and some other tools, all in the name of type. You know, regardless of what the person is doing. So if you work for an organ, let's say somebody has a client and they're like, okay, this client is in this very specific area, like hospitals, and I want 16 type descriptions, but I want them tailored to medical doctors and nurses and so on who will be reading this. You can just feed in like general descriptions to it, or some reference points to an AI, and it will create, I think, what are really like 95% good descriptions of the types, like that. You don't have to spend weeks or months like trying to compose something. Like in 5 minutes, it will do it. So some of it is just remaining on top with that. And yeah, so yeah, there's like book projects and stuff, but I think it's really about this, like staying on top of the wave right now, and really spreading the brain imaging. The next stop coming up, which is really exciting for me, is Tokyo, and Singapore. And so there, for those wondering, I don't know if you all know that there's the Tokyo Type Conference, April, what is it, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And then, yeah, getting to Tokyo is not cheap, but once you're there, it's not too expensive. And then on the 5th and 6th will be brain imaging sessions. And this is in conjunction, not only with the folks in Japan who do type, but also the Australian Type Association. And then in Singapore, to do something a little bit similar. So it's just like doing that, and then going to North Carolina, and for anyone in the Chapel Hill area, the same kind of thing in Chicago as well. Oh, and I should mention, I'm very excited. So there's this dude in Jeremy in Wisconsin, Sheboygan, Wisconsin, who runs escape rooms, not only for fun for people to sign up, but for organizations, and he does do this, that teams come in and they go through the escape rooms to like improve their team building skills, and it's just a shared experiences. And he was like, what if we did brain imaging on people as they went through the escape room experience? Because that's a very different than having somebody sit down and complete a set of tasks in a sort of quiet, steady environment. And I'm like, with the new wireless caps, we can totally do that. In fact, now that we have affiliate practitioners, we have 4 of these caps. And he says, yeah, you know, I usually do run people, we can do 4 at a time in the escape room. And then how amazing that would be to do like a baseline comparison. So what are the brain imaging results say for you, Thomas, when you're just like doing the standard 35-minute one versus when you're in an escape room? And we know IJ types are a little bit different brains when we're put on the spot than when we're just given a series of like cognitive tasks.
Mm-hmm.
And then facilitating all of this, giving people feedback, like helping it make it useful to them and all of that. So that looks like that will be early May. And that's experimental, but if it works, it's something that we can advertise to organizations and get that is something to do too. So I know these sound more like ENTJ projects than INTJ, but I am pretty excited about them.
I mean, you stay busy. You stay like, what you say, Shirley?
I was going to ask, do you have a list of like the dates where you're going to be doing the scans and whatnot?
Yes. In fact, it's just this past week that I nailed, like actually purchased tickets for a lot of things. And I think I'm pretty much set through the end of July. Like I don't know the dates that I'll be in Munich yet in July, but I'll be there in July. Like there's so some of them are not quite nailed down, but like no, like oh yeah, it's going to be like the first week in May kind of thing. Here, one moment. No, later. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, so that's sort of what is in store for the year. I mean, yeah, I have a vision sort of the future, but that really is just a giant list of projects to do. Like there's more to get out. I'd like to see more stuff that's around body mind practice. And around health. I think that that's something that at least Gen X is going to get more interested in. And even millennials, as millennials are like, oh my God, I'm 40. What's going on? What is this wrinkle and these gray hairs that I'm seeing? And as somebody already 54 years old and still like fit and healthy and not taking any medications or things like that, not having anything. It's not just genetics or something. Like it's there's some like knowledge and wisdom there too. So that's not type related per se, but I feel like it's something that can benefit people.
Yeah, I definitely think as an NTJ, I'm very health conscious. I'm very like I take stuff now that's like I should be taking when I'm like 50, but that's all because I want to be like in the best shape or best thing possible. Like especially with like the mitochondria. I don't know if you know about the mitochondria pills that like kind of boost your mitochondria. You can use was it CK? Thomas, you know what it's called? CK30 it's like ubiquitin. Something it's weird. It's pretty expensive.
Yeah.
I've been taking that for a while. I absolutely love it, but like they always say, like the older people take it. And I'm like, yo, I'm taking it now because I don't want mine to drop at all. You know, if you get anything in life, if you keep at a certain level, then you don't have to worry about as big of a drop off. It's kind of like when I stop running, now I don't run ever anymore. You know, like there's no running. Like I'm not going out there to run anymore. But I'll continue to keep lifting weights and stuff. But Dario, you take good care of yourself. Especially for somebody who's 50. You look like you're 30, man.
And this is not a filter I have on, by the way. This is
Hey, but it
thank
seems
you for the interview. Yeah.
NTJ is kind of always on top of that health stuff.
Yeah. Maybe that's a way to lure more ENTJs into the type community. Just saying.
Thomas, you got anything? I know Dario got to go, but
yeah, maybe just one more because probably about a week ago, it just occurred to me like I'm just because I know that there's a lot of skeptics out there, skeptics about MBTI or typology broadly speaking, but also like there's skeptics about like your brain scans and the work that you're doing. So I guess I'm just curious about what your thoughts are about like the skeptics about typology, the skeptics about your work. Do you care? Is there anything you think eventually that like typology will gain like more acceptance? Because it's you have those certain people like that they're just all about the big five, like they think the big five has validity, but typology doesn't. It's they think it's like a pseudoscience, or they think it's like astrology. It's like, I'm just curious about what your thoughts are on that.
I think that the big five does a great job of doing what it tries to do, which is to measure behavioral traits. I think for a lot of people who come from a statistics and academic psychology background, it's really hard for them to understand that there are other ways to look at personality besides statistical distributions and behavior traits. Like, it really is very hard for them to think outside of that circle. Sometimes with those individuals, I'm sort of like, maybe I need to point you to cognitive science, because I'm like but then on the other hand, I've literally had somebody say that, what was it? Neuroscience was junk science. Not me, mine, but like or genetics. That was it. It was genetics is junk science. I'm like, what do I say to that? Like, there is no response to that. I haven't had like, yeah, there's probably been one or two like graduate students who had like feisty questions, but I answered those. And I remember them being satisfied by it. Like, I think they just wanted to know what are the answers, because I don't discuss every detail. When I've done presentations to academic people in neuroscience, everything I do actually is very standard. Like, the brain wiring maps are, yeah, I don't use Pearson R, I use Hebbian learning, but actually more and more of the brain imaging people are using Hebbian learning. That's not a surprise. I use fast Fourier transform for amplitude and frequency. Like, all of these things that I'm presenting, the different regions of the brain and their contributions to activity. All I say is the contributions. I would say one thing that has changed from 2011 is that now I almost entirely focus on networks rather than individual brain regions. I mean, there is some value to individual brain regions, but I think that was the main sort of criticism. And yet that itself was something that was still evolving at the time, like networks, and let's talk about networks. And I do, and now I talk about networks. So if anybody wants to say like, oh no, this is not a legitimate way to do brain imaging or something, I'm like, no, it is. Sorry, like everything I do is very standard, and you can find this and that on Wikipedia and whatever it is. I felt it was very important actually to keep that as like stereotypical and by the book as possible.
Yeah, you go over the methods in the neuroscience.
I do like the protocol and stuff like that. I would say that like the book is now, what is it, 13 years old, and I definitely need to do an update because I use different equipment. Like I said, I focus on networks rather than the individual regions. I do use a social interactive environment rather than putting them in a cubicle to interact with the computer, but I sort of explain why I do that. And you can do that. So I think that there's a group of skeptics who are legitimately skeptical. So that's a small number who are informed. There's a group of skeptics who are grossly misinformed and just like repeating stuff and being difficult for the sake of being difficult. Like, I've definitely encountered some dominant TI types that can never be convinced of anything else, because the only kind of evidence or answer that I can give them that they'll believe is on their own terms. Like, I have to play their game. It's like, I have to agree that type is a trait model in order for them to be satisfied, but I don't agree that it's a trait model. Therefore, we can never close the gap. Like that's just the way it is with them. They're choosing to be boneheaded, and that's it. And then I think that there are some people who are just jealous. And I don't even think that's the majority, but that's a little bit there too. I mean, 5-factor has a marketing problem. It's very difficult to communicate the results. Nobody knows what to do with them. They don't tell you anything magical. It's not about development. It's not about anything going on inside of you. It's like your model, yeah, it's good for like external trait behavior stuff. But I don't know what to do with it. And a lot of other people don't either. And nobody wants to be told like, oh, you're low on openness and high on neuroticism. And like, that's good as a research measure, but as a practical measure, people don't want to hear that. And the fact is that 5-factor presents a best way to be. Like, it doesn't say that when you take it, But when you read the literature and you see the way it's debriefed, basically a non-neurotic ENFJ is the best kind of person that you can be, to translate it into type terms. You want to be
Okay.
extroverted, you want to be open, you want to be like friendly and conscientious, low on neuroticism, and then that's like the best kind of person. So I'm not going to push back too hard. I mean, in the couple of places where people have mentioned something, like somebody said, like, when you present, please use like the amount of activity in each region grayscale rather than color, because color is actually for fMRI and it makes me think of something else. And so I switched, because I'm like, yeah, that's actually a legitimate point in the literature. When you just want to show them out, you should use grayscale. And to talk more about networks, and I wanted to do that anyway. So I think I've made some accommodations. There's some people who are like, but why aren't you publishing or this or that? And I'm like, well, I do publish to some extent, but I'm also in the commercial world. I'm not in academia anymore. And everyone in academia wants to hold the entire world and everyone in it to their way of doing things. And I'm like, if you want to know, like, just ask me, I'll tell you I have a white paper, like, I'll send you everything. I've shared my data with people, like, it's a real thing. We have affiliate practitioners, they go and do stuff on their own, they get results that make sense. It's not like some mysterious hidden secret ingredient that's happening. I mean, that's my sort of long response to it. So I sort of care.
He's like, sort of.
Very, very INTJ response. I
Yeah.
sort of care.
Yeah, I don't like the big five. The big five doesn't really, it just tells you one thing. I mean, yeah, you'll probably get the same results, but it doesn't tell you like how you think or why you go to these type of sources or why you think with a logical framework. It doesn't tell you any of the cognitive type things or any development wise. It just says, okay, you're high in openness, you're highly conscientious, you're low in neuroticism, you're low in agreeableness. It doesn't really tell you anything. It's like, okay, that's just who you are. You just take it and
So, something else the 5-factor people don't want the public to know is that outside of academic personality psychology, there are academic people who are actually very critical of Big Five for various reasons. Yes, that it has no underlying model, and that may not even qualify as a model at all, even though it's called 5-factor model. Like, epistemologically, it doesn't qualify as a model. That the way it was developed, that it was narrowed down to its 5 factors, and that all of the research done afterwards makes the assumption that there are 5 factors. Now, there's some people who stepped out of that and said, no, there are 6 or 7, and they actually then criticize the Big Five in that way, even if they're still trait people. There are people in cognitive science who feel like, yeah, we've tried to use it and we find like it doesn't really give us interesting results. There's been neuroscience studies with Big Five. Doesn't really correlate to that much that's interesting in the brain. So it might be just lack of analytical power on their end, like they're not using good analytical tools to analyze their results, because there's got to be like some interesting things. And there's like a few, and they're sort of vague, and but yeah, it actually they don't want you to know that like it's a purely language-based model, and maybe personality is about more than language, for example. And sorry, they're going off on a tangent, but that was my yeah.
That's actually an interesting point about the language. I didn't think about that because, like, you know, the connotations might not carry over to another language. For instance, like, just when you try to translate words, words often don't translate one to one. So then, yeah, it's kind of, I think it'd be kind of sketchy. You know, I'm just speculating, like across different languages. So,
yeah, I think sometimes the most powerful thing is to simply dismiss something outright. Like the one published paper in 1993 or whatever that sort of dissed the MBTI, like that's about a version that's been no longer in use. Like it was completely replaced, like from the ground up in its design. And I'm like, yeah, those were legitimate criticisms, and that version hasn't been in use for like 25 years. Like it's not relevant. Genetics, most of the critics are not aware of the Minnesota identical twins study that used both 5-factor and MBTI. MBTI performed just as well as 5-factor did. I mean, had the same kind of results. And just sort of be like, yeah, I'm coming, especially Jung is about cognitive processes,
Mhm.
like psychological processes, not just traits. Yeah, I by the way, reminded I had a thing starting 5 minutes ago. So it's somebody's like, oh, I'm in the room. Are you going to come in? So I'll end with this, but I think that there's a lot of things that is just like, yeah, I'm coming from a cognitive science and neuroscience perspective, not personality psychology. Like I just use the word personality to draw people to the topic because it's an everyday word people understand. And that's so it's like, yeah, maybe you need to like branch over into a different discipline. And it's great because then the INTPs in particular are very anchored in their way of doing things, are like, oh no, that's outside of my discipline. Maybe I shouldn't talk about that.
Gotcha. And I feel like it is usually, like you said, it's usually the TI dominants who they want to point the finger and say typology is it's garbage or it's pseudoscience.
Yeah. That said, I do think that there are a couple of like anti-type critics who are INTJs. Yeah, and I'm just like, dude, I don't know, wrong paradigm, and I understand why you're saying this, but it's still not right. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay, so I have my other one to go to, and that's I think it's Joyce Mang.
All right, well, tell Joyce I said hi.
Yeah, I will, absolutely.
All right, Dario, thank
you. Thank you for your questions,
Of
everyone.
course, yeah, thanks again.
Thank
Absolutely.
you, Dario.
Hope to see you guys again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay.